sets of instructions that your mind uses that dictates your behavior. Well, they start early. They start for me, it began around 2 years old. I was on my father's bed with my father, and he was performing cunnilingus on me, and my mom came into the room. And she just was rightly overwhelmed with what she saw. And she proceeded to make a lot of noise and get really upset and go to the heart of what, in her mind, should not be happening between a man and his daughter. And she proceeded to slit her wrists. So from there, my father used that as a reason to put her into shock treatments. So I had no access to a woman and no access to anyone I could talk to. And I was only 2 years old. We're talking just about being able to use words. So the first question always is, well, where was the mom? Well, the mom was pretty quickly disabled, had her brain disabled, so that she could not be there. My memory of her was being in a rocking chair in her robe, and it was like lights on, nobody home. She looked just like my mom. I mean, the kid knows who her mother is, but there was no response from her when I came near her. I wanted to crawl up into her lap. I wanted to be able to tell her what was going on for me, but I had no access there. So that was part of what into the thinking that there wasn't anywhere I could go with the story that I needed to tell. So that was like the beginning, that those first instructions that my mind was working with. And my father the family, there was 4 kids. There were 3 at the time that I was 2, but then my sister came along too. And my mother would stay home and take care of them. And my father and I would go to church on Sunday. And then he would take me to a place called the Candy Kitchen, which was like a soda fountain. And for me, I was on a date. In my mind, what I had built in my mind was, I was this man's wife. My mother was out of the picture. She couldn't function. So the little me, as in the small little girl mind, decided, well, I can take care of Dad. I can make him happy. I can be the one that takes care of him. So for me to go to the Candy Kitchen with my father was to be on a date. I was with my man. That's how I thought about it. It's not that it was a good way or a bad way to think about it. It's how the thought process got built as I was growing up. And from the Candy Kitchen, we'd take rides into back roads that my father knew. The car would stop, and I would make my father happy. And what my father wanted was to be made happy, either to have a blowjob or a hand job or whatever he was wanting at that point in time. And I saw that as that's who I was. That was what I was supposed to do for him. It's a very strange kind of thing. I mean, I can see your faces. It is weird. It's so out of the natural order of how things should be in a house, in a family. It's just out of natural order. It's not right or wrong. It's just like, what? How weird is that? But until you get to look at it from so many angles, I didn't even know it was weird. To me, that was normal. That was how it was for me. To the point where there was a bar downtown that I knew the Knights of Columbus, and this is another thread of the story in a minute. The Knights of Columbus was above this bar downtown. And I marched myself down there to buy my father something I thought he would enjoy, and I knew he liked Manhattans. So I walked in there as if I were a grown woman, and I said, I want to buy my father a drink. And the guys at the bar were like, wow, ooh, never saw this one before. This is new. And they said, no, we really can't. You know, you're a minor. I was about 7 years old at that time. You're a minor. We really can't sell you a drink, but we'll write a piece of paper that says we'll give your father a couple of Manhattans when he comes here. And I took that home and I gave it to my father, and I thought I was cool. I bought my man a drink. That's how entitled I thought I was, how special I thought I was, how my position in the relationships of the family was that skewed. It was that far off. It was that strange. So I got to be about, I was around 5 or 6 when my father started taking me to the Knights of Columbus. And that was, it's a social club that has some religious overtones, where a group of men get together and they do charity things. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's sort of like the Elks, but it's under the umbrella of the Catholic Church. And my father would put me in the broom room, the storage broom room, and the men would come in and I would take care of them. My father asked. So I was, in my mind, it was almost like being a hostess. They had needs, and I took care of them just like I took care of my father, and that's what my father asked me to do, so I did it. That's just the way it was. And one of the people who were there that came was the principal of the Catholic school that I went to. So you also have that overtone of authority there, and of someone who was thought to be in charge of the ethics of the community. So he was also one of the people that came into the broom closet. So there's so many layers of this thought process where somehow I was special, somehow I knew better than my mom, and I had the sanction of this organization and the sanction of the priest. It was a very strange layer upon layer upon layer of instructions for my mind to work with. I was in therapy for years and years, and it never got to the depth where I could find out where it began and what it meant. Those things just didn't come out in therapy. And the therapists weren't always useful in that they would take a good or bad position about what went on, which was not useful for me. That wasn't helpful at all to say this was a good thing or this was a bad thing. They didn't take a neutral stance, and they had their own ideas about what had happened, and they weren't able to stay neutral about it and say, okay, this is just thoughts in this child's head that got in there really strange because she was only 2 or only 5 or only 7 and unable to sort out all of those things that had gone on. And by the time I was 11, I got pregnant. Most likely it was my father. That was like, of the people that you could pick from, it was probably him because that was the most contact. And I had an abortion, which also was probably it was helpful in that I didn't have to deal with a baby and all the questions and trying to fit that child into a system that was already pretty skewed. I also was not exactly the model child. Here, my mother had really taken the hit for me. She was the only one that spoke up and spoke up loudly to my father. And what happened was she wound up with the shock treatments, not me. So, mom, who I should have been looking up to and saying, wow, I feel really badly that she wound up in the way. You know, she got caught in the crossfire. That's what I'm trying to say. She got caught in the crossfire there. My father needed to silence her because of me, because of something that was going on with me. I was as nasty as could be to her. I treated her like my maid. I treated her like no one would ever say anything to me about something I did to her. And my father pretty much didn't discipline me. For whatever reason, he didn't. So I was not the model child. I was very nasty to my mom. She didn't need that, and I didn't need it. Neither one of us. I needed a strong woman role model there that knew what needed to be done in that situation. Unfortunately, she was robbed of that by the set of circumstances she was in. And because of the thought process of the way men thought at that time and the way women thought about men too, because at that time, and maybe some of that still goes on today, is, well, you know, they're like that. Men are like that. They have needs. All of those kinds of sayings and phrases that we hear, you know, somebody has to take care of them. Or it's my marital duty. You know, all of those kind of ideas that swirl around and that are in the flavor or the air of a community. It was there. I mean, pretty much everyone in that town, it was a small town, knew what was going on. They knew. They could just see the way a little girl walks. Well, a little girl doesn't walk without authority. A little girl doesn't go and do these things. You know, they knew something was going on, but nothing came out to the surface where they would have to confront it because the silence and the lie was always, the lid was always on top of what was going on. Don't say anything. You're going to wind up with shock treatments where you don't remember. And maybe remembering is just what you need to do. You're going to be punished. Those kind of things were all in the mix for me. It was crazy. It was crazy making. And not until I began to float did I begin to access that first sleep cycle, that lower, quieter, more silent place where I could begin to unravel, begin to take a thread of this and a thread of that out of that weaving in my brain of all of those different thoughts and thought patterns, that I could start, just begin to make sense out of what happened to me and how 90% of it was inside of my head. It wasn't anything actual. I was never, ever going to be my father's wife. That was physically and actually impossible. I didn't always have to be something that I was not. I was always trying to be this thing that I could never, ever, ever achieve. I was a little girl at that time. Now I can be my own woman without all of that on top of my back to carry around, without all of that weight. So, knowing that if I could start pulling apart the threads and unraveling that thought process, wouldn't it be a good thing to invest in float centers? Because if that was going to impact my life for the better, every single woman like me, it was going to impact their life for the better. And every man who is around a woman who knows what she's about, it's going to impact them for the better. Different things are going to be pulled out of them instead of them being accepted for something that's less than. They're going to be asked for something more. So the men could only increase and get better and have a wider view of what was possible for them. The relationships are going to be so much bigger and so much stronger, and the families were going to have a base, a good, strong base. And if that was true in the community, it's going to be true of the businesses as well. Because once you correct it in the thinking machinery, and it goes up from the bottom all the way through, all the way through, all of the ways you think, it's going to get into every endeavor. So the businesses also were going to be healthier. The way people thought about each other was going to be more caretaking. People were going to understand that what they did affected others. It was just going to be amazing. And that's why this place is here, because I could see into the future what could happen. What could happen with float centers? What if we had this one? And what if we had another one? And what if Ken opened one and then had another one? And it can keep building so that people can start to unravel. Just take those first steps of unraveling and let that carry them forward. So now I think of my life as, okay, if those events didn't happen the way they happened, I never would have found the way to talk to you now. Does that make sense? If you took away those events, I wouldn't be me. And I'd rather be me. I'd rather look at the world through these eyes than anybody else's, than try to be anybody but me. So that's how, that's the story of how Art of Floating is here, and how iFloat is up in Connecticut. Now Quantum Floats is in New Jersey, and why we want to increase it. Why we wanted to have more people come, have more people have that experience of, wait, maybe what happened to me isn't actually the way I thought about it in the first place. And maybe I was just a little kid who didn't know any better and didn't have anybody to talk to at that time. That's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to wear, and it's a lot easier to walk around with that set of thoughts in your mind. So I offer that to you as something to think about.